So today's class is on the diabetes mellitus topic, and this class is for the BSc Nursing second year students. This topic is very important uh, from practical viewpoint also and from the exam point of view also. So diabetes mellitus, there is a I have shown this blue circle. So this blue circle is a universal symbol which shows diabetes mellitus. So, what is diabetes mellitus? Diabetes mellitus, it is a group of metabolic diseases. So, it is a group of metabolic diseases which are characterized by the elevated levels of glucose in the blood resulting from defects in the insulin secretion, insulin action on the both. And this definition is given by ADA, that is American Diabetes Association. So basically, when we define the term diabetes mellitus, it include metabolic diseases, and in group of metabolic diseases, and in this group there is blood glucose levels elevation. And why it is happening? Because as you all know, insulin function is to regulate the blood sugar levels by reducing them when they increases in the blood. So because there is a defect in the insulin secretion, or there is a defect in the insulin action, or both, either the insulin is not secreted, or it is secreted but it is not in sufficient amount, or it is secreted in the sufficient amount but the cells are not responding well to the insulin. So in this way diabetes mellitus occur. So we can say that diabetes mellitus, it is a disease condition in which there are elevated levels of blood glucose. Now what are the risk factors for diabetes mellitus? First, if the age is 45 years or more than 45 years, the person is more prone for developing the diabetes mellitus. The person is hypertensive, the blood pressure is more than or equal to 140 by 90 mm of Hg. When the HDL cholesterol levels, which is a good cholesterol, if it is less than or equal to 35 milligram per deciliter or 0.90 millimole per liter, and or triglyceride levels are equal to 250 milligram per deciliter or more than 250 milligram per deciliter, that is 2.8 millimole per liter. Then history of gestational diabetes or delivery of babies who are over the 9 pounds. So if there is a history of diabetes in the previous pregnancy, the mother developed the diabetes mellitus in the pregnancy period only. She was not having diabetes mellitus, but during the pregnancy only she developed this gestational diabetes. So if there is a history, or the baby is born whose weight was more than the 9 pounds, right? So 1 pound is equal to approximately 450 grams. So if the baby's weight is more than 9 pounds, then there may be woman is more risky for developing the diabetes mellitus, that is type 2. We will discuss about the classification in the later slides. Then family history of diabetes. In the family, if the father, mother, sibling is having any family history, then the person is more risk for having the diabetes mellitus. Then obesity. Then race and ethnicity. It is more common in those who are African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and the Pacific Islands. So these are the risk factors for the diabetes mellitus. Age, if it is more than or equal to 45 years of age, the person is hypertensive. There is a history of gestational diabetes mellitus. There is a family history. The person is obese, or the person cholesterol levels, HDL cholesterol levels are less, while the triglyceride levels are more. So these are the risk factors for development of the diabetes mellitus. Now the classification, we can classify most commonly into type 1 diabetes mellitus and the type 2 diabetes mellitus, and there is also third classification, gestational diabetes mellitus. Type 1 diabetes mellitus is also known as insulin dependent. diabetes mellitus, that is IDDM, insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. And type 2 diabetes mellitus is also known as non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, NIDDM, and then gestational diabetes mellitus. So what is type 1 diabetes mellitus? It was formerly called juvenile diabetes mellitus or insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. It was called juvenile because its onset is most commonly seen during the childhood years. So that's why it was called juvenile diabetes mellitus. Now, why it is called insulin dependent? Because those who are having type 1 diabetes mellitus, they need insulin. It is not that with the medications their blood glucose levels will be maintained. No, they will require insulin definitely. So that's why they are called insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Then why type 1 diabetes mellitus occur? Because there is a destruction of the beta cells in the islets of Langerhans of the pancreas, and therefore they are unable to produce the insulin. So as you all know, beta cells of the pancreas secrete the insulin. So if there is a destruction of these beta cells, there will be no any insulin production. So in the type 1 diabetes, there is a destruction of these beta cells because of any autoimmunity or autoimmune disorder, and because of this destruction there will be no any formation of the insulin. Only 5 to 10% of people with diabetes have type 1 diabetes. So 5 to 10% are having type 1 diabetes mellitus, and then 90 to 95% are having type 2 diabetes mellitus. Most common diabetes mellitus is type 2 diabetes mellitus. Then the patient with type 1 diabetes is of most often young होता है, thin होता है, and it is also prone to develop the ketoacidosis. So basically, what is ketoacidosis? Ketoacidosis. So uh, all of you know that the cells require glucose, but because the insulin is not secreted, it is not produced, or there is a the cells are not responding to the insulin, therefore the glucose will not be taken up by the muscles, fat and liver, right? So it will not be utilize, there will be no any utilization of glucose from the blood for the energy, but the body needs glucose. So what it will do, the body compensate break by breaking down of the non-carbohydrate substances. For example, the fatty acids, the amino acids, they will be broken down and then they will form the glucose, right? But when they are forming the glucose, they also form the ketone bodies. These ketone bodies, they are acids, acidic in nature. Okay, keto acids. So keto, and that's why it is called ketoacidosis. So in the type 1 diabetes mellitus, there is no any insulin. If there is no any insulin, it means the glucose can't be utilized from the blood. So the glucose formation is by the non-carbohydrate substances, and this process is called gluconeogenesis. So that's why the type 1 diabetes mellitus patients are more prone for developing the ketoacidosis. Now what is the pathophysiology? So first, it is the autoimmune destruction. So the pancreatic islets are infiltrated with the lymphocytes, right? They will get infiltrated with the lymphocytes because of autoimmune destruction, autoimmune disorder, and this process is called insulitis. So the pancreatic islets, these are infiltrated with the lymphocytes, then beta cells will get destructed, and when all the beta cells will get destructed, the inflammatory process reduces and the islets will become atrophied. Atrophied means reduced in the size. Now when there is a destruction of the beta cells, there will be deficiency of the insulin secretion. So it is this loss of insulin secretion that leads to the metabolic derangements associated with the insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. In the flowchart also, because of any viral infection, there is alteration of the normal cells. Then autoimmune response will take place. There will be destruction of beta cells, and when there is a destruction of beta cells, insulin will not be produced. There will be deficiency of insulin, and this will called as type 1 diabetes mellitus. When we are differentiating the type 1 diabetes mellitus, the pathophysiology is the most important factor. Second is type 2 diabetes mellitus. It is formally called adult onset diabetes mellitus or non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. So because its onset is in the adulthood, it is not that it will be present in the it will not be started at the childhood. That's why it is called adult onset diabetes mellitus. And non-insulin dependent, it means that the person's blood glucose level can be maintained without insulin, like by uh, changing the lifestyle, by eating diabetic diet, by exercising, by maintaining the normal BMI. So all these contributions can lead to the management of the type 2 diabetes mellitus, and it is not necessary that insulin may be required for its management or for maintaining the blood glucose levels. That's why it is called the non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Then insulin is still made by the pancreas, but it is in inadequate amount. So in this type 2 diabetes mellitus, it is not that insulin is not secreted. No, it is secreted, but it is not in sufficient amount, or the cells of the muscles, fat, liver, they are not responding well to the insulin, and this is called insulin resistance. So for the type 2 diabetes mellitus, insulin resistance occur. It means that the muscles, fat and the liver cells are not responding to insulin, and therefore glucose will not be utilized from blood into the muscles, fat and liver. That's why it is called insulin resistance. So if there is insulin resistance, the cells are not responding to the insulin, the blood glucose levels will remain elevated. So this is called hyperglycemia. Hereditary is responsible for up to 90% of cases. So family history is most important in the type 2 diabetes mellitus. So this is the basis for the type 1 and the type 2. In the type 1 there is destruction of the beta cells, but in the type 2 there is insulin resistance. Now this is the pathophysiology of the diabetes mellitus. So in this flow chart you can see there is the genetic predisposition and the environmental factors such as obesity. So because the person is genetically predisposed for developing the diabetes mellitus, or the person has a family history, there is the deranged insulin release from the pancreas. So because of this only, the insulin is not produced by the pancreas in the sufficient amount. Now if there is insulin is not released in sufficient amount, or there is an insulin resistance because of obesity, this will cause decreased glucose uptake from the muscles, right? And if the glucose is not uptaken by the muscles via the blood, hyperglycemia occur, and this is called type 2 diabetes mellitus. Similarly, in there is any family history, the pancreas is having deranged insulin release, so there may be chances that there from the liver there is increased hepatic glucose output. So as you all know, glycogen is converted into the glucose, right? And the glucose is stored in the liver in the form of glycogen. So there is increased of this phenomena, and this will lead to the hyperglycemia and leading to the type 2 diabetes mellitus. Now what is gestational diabetes mellitus? Gestational means which is related with the gestation, right? So it is related with the pregnancy. So it occurs when the pregnant woman without any previous history of diabetes develop the high blood sugar levels. So it is diagnosed first time in the pregnancy, and because of pregnancy only the woman is having diabetes mellitus. It occurs in about 2 to 10% of all the pregnancies and may improve or disappear after the delivery. Now, why it is occurred? We have already discussed about the pathophysiology of type 1 and the type 2, but why the gestational diabetes occur? It occurs because during pregnancy there are various hormones and the adipokines which are secreted from the placenta, and these hormones and adipokines are causing the insulin resistance. This is one of the cause. The hormones which are secreted during pregnancy, they are causing the insulin resistance. Second is, during pregnancy there is deposition of the fat, decreased exercise, increased calorie intake, and this all contribute to the glucose intolerance, right? So that's why in the gestational diabetes mellitus there are increased chances of insulin resistance and glucose intolerance leading to diabetes mellitus. Now, what are the signs and symptoms of this diabetes mellitus? The three classical symptoms of diabetes mellitus are polydipsia, polyuria, polyphagia. Polydipsia means excessive thirst, polyuria means excessive urination, and polyphagia means excessive hunger. So, why it is occurring? Because our body is not able to utilize the glucose from the blood, so glucose is unable to enter the normal cells like muscles, fat, liver, so the cells are starving, and because they are starving the person will feel hungry, that is polyphagia. Now the large amount of glucose is in the blood, right? So there is increased blood glucose levels, and this is causing increase in the serum osmolality, right? Because the number of glucose particles are increasing. Now the renal tubules, the kidneys renal tubules are unable to reabsorb all of this excess glucose which is filtered by the glomeruli, and that's why glycosuria results. Excessive blood glucose levels in the blood are occurring, and therefore the kidneys are unable to reabsorb all this excess glucose. So the excessive glucose is get filtrated into the urine, and therefore the glycosuria results, means glucose in the urine results. So large amount of body water are required to excrete this glucose, and that's why the person have polyuria, nocturia, and the dehydration. To excrete this glucose the body water is required, and that's why the person feel that's why the person will have polyuria, because to excrete this glucose from the kidney there will be excessive uh, water reabsorption into the urine, so that's will lead to the polyuria, nocturia, and the dehydration. If there is polyuria and the person is not taking sufficient fluid, then dehydration will occur. Now there is increased osmolality, and in dehydration this will cause the polydipsia. Now high blood glucose levels also causes fatigue, blurred vision, abdominal pain, and the headache. And there may be fatigue, weakness, sudden vision changes, tingling or numbness in the hands, feet, dry skin, skin lesions or wounds which are slow to heal, and recurrent infection like gum infection, skin infection, and vaginal infection. Then the onset of type 1 diabetes may also be associated with a sudden weight loss or nausea, vomiting, or abdominal pains if diabetic ketoacidosis has developed or there is a presence of ketones in the urine. So I told you that what is the reason behind polyuria, polyphagia, and the polydipsia. Apart from that, we also discussed about some signs and symptoms. So but in the type 1 diabetes, the onset in when it starts, there is sudden weight loss, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain if the diabetic ketoacidosis has developed. So what is diabetic ketoacidosis? I already told you about the gluconeogenesis, in which the non-carbohydrate substances like the fat or the amino acids are broken down and they are forming the glucose and the ketone bodies. This is called as diabetic ketoacidosis. Why acidosis? Because these ketone bodies are acidic, are acids. That's why. Now, if there is excessive ketone formation, that will be detected in the urine also, because that will get filtered from the kidney and ketonuria will occur. So in a nutshell, we can with this image we can identify what are the main symptoms of diabetes. Okay, so those which are in the blue color, they are most common in the type 1 diabetes mellitus. So there may be polydipsia, polyphasia, there may be lethargy, or there may be stupor. Stupor is a condition in which the person lacks the critical mental functioning ability and level of consciousness. The person mainly becomes very rigid, the person becomes mute, and only appear to be conscious as eye are open, and the person can follow the surrounding objects, but most of the time the person appear to be in a sleepy state. Okay, then weight loss, then Kussmaul breathing, that is hyperventilation. Kussmaul breathing is deep, rapid, and the labored breathing. So in that, the depth of the respiration will be increased, the rate of the respiration will be increased. So because of that, there will be uh, excretion of carbonic acid via the ventilation. So because the person is having diabetic ketoacidosis, in the blood the acid is increasing, right? The pH is decreased. So acid is increasing, the person is going into the metabolic acidosis. To compensate for that, the person will have hyperventilation, so that excessive breathing will cause the excretion of the carbonic acid via the process of breathing. So there will be excretion of acid from the blood, so this will stabilize or maintain the blood pH level, right? Then eyes, blood vision, then in the breath, smell of acetone. This is just because of the ketone bodies in the blood, because they are so much excessive. Acetone is also a ketone, so there will be fruity odor, or fruity breath. Then in the gastric, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and in the urinary, polyuria and the glycosuria, that is presence of glucose in the urine. So these, in a nutshell, these are the main signs and symptoms of the diabetes. Now, how to diagnose this diabetes mellitus? This is by according to the HDO, and there are 4 tests which are done, but any one of the following may show that the person is having diabetes mellitus. So if the fasting blood glucose level is more than or equal to 7 millimole per liter or 126 milligram per deciliter, plasma glucose is equal to or more than 11.1 millimole per liter, that is 200 milligram per deciliter, 2 hours after a 75 gram oral glucose load, as in a glucose tolerance test. So glucose tolerance test, what happened, the person will have fasting of 8 to 12 hours, right? And after that, in the morning the blood sample will be collected, baseline blood glucose level will be checked, then person uh, will have 75 gram glucose within 5 minutes. He or she needs to drink that, and after 2 hours the blood glucose levels are again checked. So if they are more than or equal to 11.1 millimole per liter or 200 milligram per deciliter, it is diabetes. If there are symptoms of high blood sugar and the casual plasma glucose equal to or more than 11.1 millimole per liter, that is 200 milligram per deciliter, or glycosylated hemoglobin, that is called HbA1c, if it is more than or equal to 48 millimole per liter or more than 6.5 dcct percent. So if any one of these 4 tests is, if it is positive, then the person is having diabetes. But what if there is um, no up to the mark level of blood glucose. For example, according to WHO, we can also categorize it as a impaired fasting glycemia and impaired glucose tolerance, in which we will check for the fasting glucose levels and 2-hour glucose levels. If the fasting blood glucose levels are more than more than or equal to 6.1 or more millimole per liter, or more than or equal to 110 milligram per deciliter, and less than 7 or less than 126 milligram per deciliter, it is called impaired fasting glucose. So for the 2-hour glucose, if it is less than 7.8, that is less than 140 milligram per deciliter, it is impaired fasting glycemia. Then impaired glucose tolerance, if it is the 2-hour glucose is more than or equal to 7.8, that is more than or equal to 140 milligram per deciliter. If the fasting glucose is less than 7 or less than 126 milligram per deciliter. So in this way, the WHO has categorized the blood glucose levels. What are the normal fasting glucose levels? These are less than 6.1 millimole per liter or less than 110 milligram per deciliter, or 2-hour glucose tolerance test is done and it is normal if it is less than 7.8 or less than 140 milligram per deciliter. But what if it is not a clear cut picture of diabetes mellitus, it is in between those values, so we can also classify it as an impaired fasting glycemia or impaired glucose tolerance. So this is how the diabetes mellitus is diagnosed. So we will continue with the management of the diabetes mellitus and its complications in the next classes. So today's session is over and you have to write assignment on difference between type 1 and the type 2 diabetes mellitus, and submit it within 2 days. Thank you so much.